Good morning to you in Europe, and welcome to everyone who has joined us for this final report on the Philippine Elections 2022 by the International Observer Mission. A special welcome to the media workers present today. My name is Peter Murphy, the chairperson of the Global Council of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney, Australia. I will be your moderator on this Zoom webinar, during which we will have a short 3-minute presentation from an IOM commissioner, an IOM participant, and a representative of our partner Contradaya, followed by question and answer. And if you have a question to put to the panel, you can type it in the Q&A function, or you can use the reactions key to raise your hand, and we'll be able to open up your mic. I hope you can get some questions ready. So our panel members today are Associate Professor Danilo Aranya-Arao, one of the conveners of Contradaya, which means Against Fraud, who works at the Department of Journalism at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. The next one is Mika van den Broek. She is an attorney, a lawyer in Belgium, who was one of the participants in the International Observer Mission. And the third one is Ms. Lee Rhiannon, an IOM commissioner and former Green senator in the Australian Parliament. The Philippine Elections 2022 International Observer Mission was recommended by the Investigate PH in its final report in September last year. Those Investigate PH reports last year exposed a dire situation for the Filipino people at all levels of their human rights, and anticipated that the violations would continue and likely intensify during the elections. Investigate PH and iChirp were themselves red tagged for carrying out this investigation and publishing those reports, and we anticipated severe security challenges in mounting an international election observer mission. However, we were able to launch it in March this year, team up with Contradaya and the United Church of Christ of the Philippines, and deploy over 60 international observers from 11 countries to many regions of the Philippines during the campaign on election day and up to June 22. We managed to protect their security, and so none were harassed by the NTF-ELCAC or the Bureau of Immigration. Before I say any more, I do want to underline that this has been a significant and courageous expression of international solidarity with the Filipino people. This final report, like the 6 IOM bulletins, the special bulletin and the interim report, is presented by our commissioners, who are all based outside the Philippines, and the identities of our observers are protected in the report. Here we are on the eve of the inauguration of President-elect Marcos Jr. Surprising to me, Vice President Sara Duterte has already been sworn in. So this final report captures in summary the content of the interim report, provides more data and more analysis of the factors leading to the election outcome, an outcome which is perplexing to the international community and to Filipinos alike. The report contains some projections on the character of the incoming administration and recommendations for election reform in the Philippines and for action on human rights by the international community. Let me introduce our first panelist. It's Danilo Aranya-Arao, one of the conveners of Contradaya, to comment on the data they assembled from their observer teams, the election results, and the post-election fallout. Danny is an associate professor of the Department of Journalism at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communications in Diliman, Quezon City. Can I hand over to you now, Professor Arao?
Thank you very much, Peter. With the limited time that we have, we will only provide an overview of what Peter correctly mentions as the information on the ground as research by our group Contradaya. But first of all, let me just say thank you to the strong international solidarity provided by our friends from the International Observer Mission By itself, I've seen the report. This is a very, very successful venture, and we hope that in the next election cycle, we will continue this partnership. Now, if you look at the major dimensions of fraud, more or less the report of the International Observer Mission would dovetail with our findings. There are various aspects of this information, particularly historical denialism and red tagging. There's also vote buying, harassment and intimidation of voters, and even our own volunteers. We've experienced that, as well as some members of the International Observer Mission. There's also misuse and abuse of government resources, and circumvention and mockery of the law. There are various instances of premature campaigning. Even if the campaign period hasn't started, they've already made their presence felt in the public sphere, which is, by the way, not allowed in our election laws. And of course, the withdrawal and substitution of candidates have been done with impunity. And we cannot stress enough how the rich and powerful have tried to hijack the election because these have been the fundamental problems even during the time that we've had manual elections in the country. Now, one particular case study that we focused on for this election cycle, as in the past, would be the party list system. The party list system, for those who may not be aware, is meant to provide a voice for the marginalized and underrepresented. But if you would notice, based on the research that we conducted, more than at least 70% of those that ran for party list seats have not been truly representative of the marginalized, and more than 90% of those who won actually came from such groups. So there is lack of transparency in the automated election system. There are questionable partnerships with Smartmatic as well as F2 Logistics, which was in charge of the handling and delivery of the election paraphernalia. There are a lot of data that we hope to present, but the lack of time again prevents us from doing so. You can just refer to our website for more information. But these are just the overview of the data. Now we present this particular case study because for the first time there is misuse of the logo of the COMELEC, and we cannot stress enough the mockery that informed our election cycle because of this. And surprisingly, the COMELEC is not really, very much alarmed by it. And I doubt if they've conducted an investigation as to who faked this particular resolution that allegedly disqualified certain party list groups and a senatorial candidate. The final report of our other partner, Vote Report PH, also points to various cases of electioneering as well as breakdown of the vote counting machines. Again, this tend to dovetail with what was found out by our friends from the International Observer Mission. Anyway, I just want to zero in last 1 minute. The election results are questionable given the extent of fraud and other irregularities, and there is also lack of transparency, and it raises doubts on the results themselves. And of course, the domination of the rich and powerful are quite apparent. Now, just as a last point, our call is to blacklist Smartmatic. We need to review the entire automated election system that started in 2010. There has to be an oversight committee that would conduct an investigation of the May 9 elections. Amendments to the party list law should also be done. And we have to have that anti-dynasty law, which was supposed to have been passed in the 1980s when the Constitution was enacted, but it's still archived in Congress, which is ironically dominated by the rich and powerful. So, okay, I apologize to Peter for going above 3 minutes, but at any rate, I thank you for this particular opportunity. Again, for more information, please go to the website of contradaya.org. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny. we're going to visit these sort of facts, I think, in the next two presentations as well. So let me introduce Mika van den Broek, an attorney at law in Belgium. She's been doing that work for 15 years there. She works on migrant and human rights cases in the collective lawyers office called Progress Lawyers Network. She came to the Philippines to be an IOM observer for the 2022 elections and has since returned to Belgium, where we hope she's safe. So please take the microphone, Mika.
Thank you so much, Peter. I can confirm that I'm completely safe in Belgium. Well, I was for the first time in the Philippines on the observation mission, and we went there with my colleague Leila between the 7th and the 15th of May. So we were there during the election, the actual election. So we went to the Visayas Islands and also to Samar Island. And we met with all kinds of people, with barangay officials, with local politicians, with barangay health worker, with peasants, fisher folks, with a lot of people being organized in their local communities, even LGBT organization, and campaign volunteers for Leni Robredo and other people. So we spoke to a lot of people, and what we found was that the elections and the political system in the Philippines are not very fair and clean. Even the opposite. At the beginning, you think that it's a democracy because there is a lot of candidates, but when you look closer, you see that a lot of these candidates have the same names. And when we started talking to people, they explained to us that this is because of the political dynasties that reign the country. So we could see which groups there were, and we talked to people, and they explained to us that actually the country is really run by these very rich families, and so the people aren't really represented in the parliament, and they keep themselves in power, and they enrich themselves by the a lot of corruption. So a lot of public money is diverted to these very rich families, the political dynasties they are called, and of course the Marcoses and the Dutertes are part of those families. The more local on local level politicians are being held um, kind of hostage by these people through a patronage system. So they have to execute what the wishes of the dynasties in order to keep their position and also keep their part in the corruption system. So one of the first real proofs of corruption fraud we saw was the vote buying. Of course, we were there during the election, and the days before that, there was a lot of movement in the street. We saw that people were really busy, and we actually went to the people's houses, and we saw people coming with the money. They gave the money to the people, and then went to the next house. So the candidates and the people helping them actually had lists of all the voters of the barangay and went from house to house to give them money with a name of a candidate or a little list of the candidates on it. And so everybody said that it's completely normal. People were after, when normally people are going to bed in the Philippines, they were still standing in the street hoping that another candidate would pass. So it was really, really rampant, and nobody asks questions, just takes the money. The day of the election, we went to several barangay to watch what happened. We saw that the election was, well, it was organized, although people had to stand in line for hours and hours in the heat. So for older people and more vulnerable people, this was really, really challenging. But what we also saw at that time was that the vote buying kept on going on. So in one barangay, there was the barangay captain had put up a tent and kept distributing the little lists and the money. Of course, they hid it for us, but people told us anyway. Then when we talked to people about who they vote for, a lot of what came up a lot was the fake news. So either they believed in it, either they explained that it exists, and that's the reason why people vote for example, Bongbong Marcos, because his campaign relied largely on social media. Philippine people are on social media all the time, so he's quite smart in that order. And he paid so many people to troll on the internet, to distribute fake news, to have fake news spread about the other candidates. For example, the fake news that the other candidates were not running anymore, the fake decisions from Comelec, and then in the end, Comelec didn't really reply to that. So I think many people just didn't vote for the party they wanted because they doubted that it still existed. So the fake news was really, really very effective. People really believe that Bongbong Marcos will be a good president, and they really believe the story that says that the Marcos period was the golden era of the Philippines. So, well, what we also learned was that almost everybody we talked to, almost everybody who is having some political ideas or is trying to help the community is being red tagged. And this is an harassment of actually everybody trying to make the Philippines a better place. And it's actually very dangerous because sometimes it's on social media, but it's always endorsed by by public figures, by the military, and it can end in real death threats. And we know that there are so many extrajudicial killings. We met young people campaigning for the first time, having not really developed political ideas, and especially not communist ideas. Even they were red tagged, and they were really, really touched by this. They felt the intimidation right away. So this is really something that's haunting everybody in the Philippines, that is doing some political work. Then that we saw the militarization. We went to barangay where there were checkpoints in the barangay, where the military was in the barangay, and we talked to the people that confirmed us that it had an influence on who they voted for, because they knew that if they would vote for the wrong candidate, that the military would punish them. So this is just one example, but we had so many more of people really being coerced to vote for who they didn't didn't want to vote for, because of the presence of the military in the during the voting process, but also just in the community. Well, last thing I want to tell you is that so many people said that the electronic votes are not reliable. They think that the outcome doesn't really represent what the people are voting for. Of course, this is impossible to check. What we do know is also that poll watchers said that politicians are assisting the people to vote, which is possible with the electronic vote system, because the people have to they have a very, very big bullet page, and so you cannot do it in private. Even though the actual voting will be in private, the preparation is open for everybody. Okay, so actually that's it. It was really a great experience. We met so many lovely people. It was an incredible country to visit. I hope to go back. But the most incredible was the corruption of the political system. There is absolutely no democracy, and human rights are so terrifying in a bad state in the Philippines. I hope uh, this mission could contribute to actually getting it better, but it's very small hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mika. Thank you very much. Our third panelist is Ms. Lee Rhiannon, a former Greens senator from Australia, and she has been a commissioner for Investigate PH last year and a commissioner for this International Observer Mission. She's been asked to put the final report findings into a broader political context and to focus on some of the recommendations in the report. So handing over to you now, Lee.
Thank you very much, Peter. And as we've heard from Danny and Mika, the evidence is just overwhelming. The national Philippine election clearly failed the people of the Philippines. Marcos Jr. and Sara Duterte were not elected legitimately. The evidence collated by the International Observer Mission revealed a shocking level of abuse of individual voters, of many candidates, and of the voting process. I've got to say that one of the most alarming comments I remember hearing when evidence was presented came from a voter who said they were scared during the election campaign. It really resonated with me. Why were people scared? Because they're fearful that something bad would happen to them or their loved ones, and it often did. And you've heard the evidence from the previous two speakers. There were extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, illegal arrests, and massive red tagging. Like the diversity of the crimes is cruelly enormous. Many voters, and just to go through some of the crimes, because it really is staggering, I just want to add a couple of points to the other speakers. Many votes were never counted. Just one example, the Bayan Muna party list lost almost 900,000 votes. Then we have voter disenfranchisement. That was rampant. There was almost 1.7 million overseas Filipino voters registered, but only 40,000 were able to cast their vote. Why did that happen? And I think we can answer that fairly quickly. You see the damage being done to the progressive side of politics time and time again. So these are some of the reasons why we concluded that the election was not fair, free, or honest. The other major failing was the lack of engagement from Western powers, from governments who say they uphold human rights and democracy, but don't speak out when such shocking crimes occur. And this is something that we do make reference to in our recommendations. The Marcos and Duterte power structures and the crimes associated with their operations are now endemic in Filipino society. And we need to ask, how can the global community help democracy in the Philippines? The International Observers Mission believes that our recommendations, and they're set out at the back of our final report, can assist. So I'll just run through some of our suggestions. An independent, non-partisan electoral institution is urgently needed. COMELEC is currently not that body. That's supposed to be the national body that runs election. It needs a major overhaul. The problems with it just go on and on. Then there should be no involvement of the military in any aspect of the election. That should be just a given. Also, we've heard about the problems with the party list. The party list system needs to be returned to its original constitutional intention. Our recommendations also call for a major overhaul for vote counting machines, a free press, and an anti-dynasty provision in the Constitution. We also consider the role of the international community, and there's many recommendations we've made here. I just wanted to concentrate on one, because it is starting to get a bit of traction internationally, and it really could make a difference. It could really put it up some of these new leaders. One of our recommendations calls for more countries to adopt the Global Magnitsky Act. Under the US version of the Act, the US government can sanction foreign government officials deemed to be human rights offenders. Anyone caught under this Act can have their assets frozen and can be banned from entering the US. Similar laws in other countries would serve as a major wake-up call to the new Philippine regime. But we need to ensure that this Act has teeth. I've got to say the version introduced in Australia is quite weak. So the type of Act and what it covers and how strong it is when it comes to freezing assets and banning the entry of these people into the country needs to be very tight. I believe that the recommendations of the International Observer Mission will assist with the many challenges Filipino people are facing. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Lee. Thank you again to Danny and Mika as well. We'll now move to the question and answer segment of the launch. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll answer as best we can. Let's go there now and just see what's happening. I might need the help from the tech team about who's raised their hands. And I don't see any questions at the moment in the Q&A. There's one down. So this was an anonymous one. In which barangays or places were people being forced to vote who they didn't want to vote for because of the presence of the military? So let's see how specific we can get without putting any people into more trouble. Would either Mika or Danny like to comment on that one?
Yeah, maybe I should comment first, and then let's see if our friends from the IOM would have the same information. From our experience in the Philippines, certain areas where there are powerful political clans would tend to force their voters into, choosing candidates that may not be their preference. So, in particular, if you want to be more specific, certain areas in Maguindanao and Lanao would be, the so-called election hotspots. And in fact, we've seen election-related violence in Lanao. On the day of the election, at least one person died because of the presence of goons that tried to disrupt the elections. That's common practice. Well, for lack of a better term, I'm using the word common for something that's unacceptable. But that's common experience even during the manual election system, where certain political clans would lord over the constituents. And that's one characteristic of political clans in the Philippines. The more powerful they are, the more impoverished the community is, because that's how they wield power and influence. That's how they're able to buy their votes. That's how they're able to buy their way into office, so to speak. But it's not just exclusive to Mindanao. There are also certain areas in the Visayas where people are coerced or harassed and intimidated into voting for the people they don't prefer, for certain nefarious characters who don't belong in office. So that's the reality in Philippine politics.
Thanks, Danny. And Mika, do you want to say anything on that question?
Yes, I don't know how much in detail I can go to in order to not bring people in danger, but actually this was in Samar. We went to some communities in Samar and where we actually saw that there was a checkpoint in the barangay, and there this was in the south of Samar, and the barangay captain said that there was actual pressure on all of the people to not vote for certain parties. And then there is a community in the north of Samar, I think it's called Las Nawas, where the people actually voted for leftist parties. And the reaction, but this was the last election, and the reaction of the military was to put checkpoints in the community and to be really harsh and severe, and to red tag as a direct result and punishment for the voting of the people for the wrong party lists.
Thank you, Mika. I think you'll find in the report there's also not a named location, but the barangay captain saying that in 2019, they the whole barangay had voted for Bayan Muna, but the military were present and they all decided that they wouldn't do that this time around. So there's that's related in the report. The next question is from Mark Famatigan, asking, with regards to the Global Magnitsky Act, what can the coalition, that is ITREP, say about Marcos Jr.'s quote-unquote diplomatic immunity in the United States? So would somebody like to take up that one?
Okay, maybe I should start also, even if
go ahead, Danny.
Even if technically I'm not part of the IOM. Contradaya is a partner of IOM. But when you say coalition, anyway, I'll just speak for Contradaya in this particular case, not necessarily for the IOM. Well, of course, when you say diplomatic immunity, it's, well, technically it applies. So the case of Marcos, with regard to the contempt of court that he has right now, he is supposed to be arrested by the time that he sets foot in any state in the US of A. Of course, some diplomatic courtesy may be extended to the Marcoses due to his position as the 17th president, but that should not prevent people uh, from making him accountable for what happened. I understand that the contempt of court has to do with their refusal to abide by the ruling of the Hawaii court with regard to the civil suit that was filed by the victims of martial law. So similar to what happened to Magnitsky, of course, what happened with the Russian tax lawyer, which was the basis for the Global Magnitsky Act, would be a little bit different from the Marcoses, but still, the magnitude of the sins committed by the Marcos family should never be forgotten. So just because he has diplomatic immunity does not escape or does not excuse him from the atrocities committed. In this particular case, the atrocities pertaining to the victims of martial law. There were more than 10,000, there are around 10,000 who filed the civil suit. Just for the record, the number is much higher. It's just that only 10,000 or so were able to file their legal papers or their affidavits. So we cannot say that all those 10,000 people were lying or that these were just products of fake news. So the number is quite massive, and people should not forget the abuses done by the Marcos family, even if technically right now he has diplomatic immunity. And to stretch the argument further, his being president does not absolve him of the sins of the past, and he needs to be still accountable for what happened. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Anybody else like to comment on that question? Lee, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, look, thanks very much, Danny. Look, I think what this question is a reminder of that while it is really important, as I said in my opening comments, that pushing for the Magnitsky Act is incredibly important to get it into a whole number of countries. But we can't just rely on that. We need a whole range of approaches here. And the international community has a big responsibility, and international institutions like the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Human Rights Council, then we have the European Union, there's international civil society, there's so many NGOs that take up these sorts of human rights issues. We've all got to intensify the monitoring of human rights situation in the Philippines, work out how we're working together, how we could put the pressure on these UN bodies to actually take it up, the ICC as well. So when I think we're talking about the difficulties in one area, and it reminds us of the importance to have a global movement that really is keeping the pressure on. And there's nothing like the public voice to force change.
Thanks, Lee. The next question is from Paul-Francois Tremblay. Many of the problems with the election have been features of previous elections, such as vote buying, intimidation, elite families. One element that's new is the role of disinformation and digital media. What recommendations are in the report to address this aspect?
Maybe I should answer from the point of view of Contradaya, because
Yes,
we also have our own report. Our friends from the IOM would chime in perhaps, or would weigh in a little bit later. There are various interventions that would be necessary. When you talk about legislative intervention in order to somehow do something about the domination of the elite families, we hope to pressure Congress to pass the anti-dynasty law and to make the necessary amendments to the party list law so that there can be more teeth to screening and vetting the party list groups that belong to political clans and big businesses, among many other criteria for flagging the questionable party list groups. Now, of course, public pressure and mass actions and protests should also be the order of the day when we talk about the need to make reforms with regard to the existing political structure, as well as to fight disinformation. What's new with Contradaya with this particular election cycle would be two things. First would be the partnership with the International Observer Mission. So there's now an international dimension to analyzing the election system here. And second is the fact-checking that we've done. We're now in partnership with Check.ph and Facts First PH, two of the biggest fact-checking networks in the country. So we tried to do fact-checking to ensure that this information would be addressed. But of course, such initiatives are not enough. So we need to sustain such efforts to make sure that we can pressure, so that we can push for the necessary changes in the structure of our system. And of course, the calls to action in the slide that I presented will be there as well. Let me just repeat: the need to blacklist Smartmatic, the need to ensure that the proper changes in the election system would be in place, even if we acknowledge the fact that much of Congress and even in the executive branch, they are now dominated by the rich and powerful. Public pressure works wonders, and we hope to sustain such public pressure in the days, months, and years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Just to add, from the recommendations of the final report, there's a rather complicated one about social media. At one level, it's recommending that there be a requirement on social media platforms that when people make a post, they have to say whether it's a report of a fact, or it's an opinion, or it's a political comment, and they have to give a source of some sort in their own post. But there's also part of the recommendation saying there needs to be a legal requirement that social media platforms must remove false posts, especially about elections and politics. And there's a fear, of course, in a context like the Philippines, that everything will get twisted upside down, and all that would happen is that the progressive voice would be banned. And this is currently underway with this recent declaration by the outgoing National Security Advisor to shut down 27 websites. So you can see why people are afraid of how to handle this situation in a context of a government like the Philippines. However, there are our recommendations. I have one question from Tina Garcia. She's saying the COMELEC and the Supreme Court both junked the disqualification and cancellation of the petitions against the candidacy of Bongbong Marcos. Can you comment on this unusual situation where a candidate for the highest position in the land has a tax evasion case and was still allowed to run for office? So very quickly, back to Danny.
Okay, yeah. But perhaps our friends from IOM can comment also later. Anyway, how do you comment on that unusual situation? Well, the quick answer there is that the situation in the Philippines is very, very unusual in the first place. I'm sorry to tell you that we have a commission on elections that's not really truly independent. Under the Constitution, it's supposed to be independent of partisan interest. It's supposed to be non-partisan. It's supposed to have quasi-judicial and quasi-legislative functions. But right now, the composition of the COMELEC commissioners, including the chair, would be practically yes people of the Duterte administration. I mean, majority of them, I'm not joking, are either fraternity brothers of the president. They came from the same university, or they're friends with certain government officials, including the president. So that's one reason. That would explain why when a particular COMELEC commissioner who's independent-minded resigned, she was supposed to vote for the disqualification of Marcos, but there was a delay in the release of the decision so that she can retire and her decision will just be ignored or put in the back burner, so to speak. So that's the problem with our election system right now. And with Marcos, please remember that it's not just the issue of disinformation. I mean, historical denialism is one important aspect. But let's not ignore the fact that his campaign is awash with cash. I mean, we're talking not just of millions, but even billions of pesos. I mean, some people would even argue it can go by the trillions. That's how much money they have right now. And if you look at information on the ground, bulk buying is so massive. I mean, we've received certain anecdotal evidence on election day. Certain voters would get as much as 10,000 Philippine pesos. That's a lot of money for an ordinary worker whose minimum wage is 500 pesos per day. So that's how massive things have become. And in fact, the narrative is that certain barangay officials would get as much as 50 million if you can ensure a Marcos victory. So that's the kind of stories that you get on the ground. So this may sound like rumors or this may sound like fake news, but the reality is there that you have a situation where the highest candidate, the one who won the election, banked on not just massive financial machinery, but also massive disinformation mechanisms, particularly through social media. So that's all we have to say. Thank you.
Thanks. Lee, would you like to comment, or Mika?
All right.
Okay, so the next question is from May Kotsakis. So she has two, and I'll just put them together. What is the planned next move of the IOM, especially with many first world countries already recognizing Marcos Jr. as the elected president? And what suggestion can IOM give Filipinos overseas to address the issue of having a president who won by fraud and dishonesty and violence when speaking to the government of their host countries? Who would like to pick up on that?
I'll have a go for this.
Go, Lee. Yep.
I'll start, and then I'm sure you can add more exact comments. Look, I think it's a really, really good question because the enormity of this issue has been well illustrated by the previous couple of comments. Look, I think what's very important is within our own countries that that we build up awareness about these issues. Because one thing, because I've been involved in the IOM, and I do regularly read the foreign affairs parts of our papers, the lack of coverage about what has happened in the Philippines is staggering. You would think that there was nothing more that happened, that there was an election and these people were elected. Nothing about all the crimes that were unearthed and just, you know, the extraordinary aspects of it. So I think within our own countries, it's working with the Filipino diaspora. It's working with the broader progressive movement. International solidarity is one of the most important aspects of being able to support the struggle of communities that are up against such tough odds, particularly when the violence is just so extreme, the corruption so endemic. So I think that's very important. Then lobbying our politicians. In Australia, we have just had a change of government, more a social democrat government, not ideal, but certainly much, much better than what we had. And I think, again, when you look at history, so many of those, and the big one I often use as an example, South Africa, it started off as a very small international campaign, very few people involved. But Mandela gave emphasis to the international solidarity that was vital to defeating apartheid in South Africa. And I think building up awareness of these crimes, lobbying our communities, lobbying our governments, so when they go to these international fora, everything from the ICC across to United Nations Human Rights Commission, they are a voice for the people of the Philippines. You know, this is going to be a long struggle and we need to be building up that awareness, absolutely. I think it's a huge part of what we have to do.
Okay, I think I could just add, you know, what we can say, what we are saying in the report and what people can say in different countries outside the Philippines is that this is not a legitimate election. that Marcos Jr., he might say he's the president, but he doesn't really have a election by a genuine process here. We find that it's really not free, fair, and honest. So we have to just find the way to speak out and neutralize any claim that Marcos and Sarah Duterte have to legitimacy in the posts that they're now going to be filling after Thursday. So, you know, it's a political struggle, but I think we've assembled enough information through the IOM to justify that conclusion. The next question, it's anonymous, but there have been international observer missions in the Philippines before. Did this IOM compare the reports from the previous ones? If so, any difference, progress, or deterioration of the electoral process? Anyone want to answer that one? So I didn't read any earlier ones. I have my own memory of some of them, which I took part in as an observer. So, you know, in short, we didn't do that particular function, but we feel that this was the worst that anyone's seen since way back in 1986. The next one, if Marcos and Duterte did not win the election and July 1 is rapidly arriving, is there still a chance for the results to be overturned? Aha. I don't think so, but anyone like to comment on that?
Okay. Well, the reality is that Marcos and Duterte won by land. It's not just a landslide. It's for the first time in history, we now have a majority vote for both president and vice president. Before, the winning margin was just by a plurality. It was never a majority or more than 50% of total votes cast. Now, is there still a chance for the results to be overturned? I think the more fundamental question here is, has the will of the people been really reflected in the results? There is reason to doubt based on the evidence of the IOM and Contradaya. These are two different separate research projects that would point to various instances of fraud and other irregularities, not just on election day, but even before that. I mean, this information is something that would have to be just quantitatively and qualitatively analyzed. So, is there a chance for the results to be overturned? The answer is no, but there is more than enough reason for the results to be challenged and doubted. So, that's all there is to it. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else on that one? If not, we'll go to the next question. This one relates to the PPCRV. It's the parish level monitoring, which was meant to be independent. So the PPCRV has insisted that the 2022 election was clean and fair. They helped to recount the votes. What do we, that the IOM, say about this? Again, maybe Mika, you'd like to comment on this one, if you can? No?
I don't know if I can. I actually never heard of the PPCRV, but
Okay.
I'm very surprised that anyone would say that these elections were clean and fair, because it was so obvious that they weren't, and there was nobody actually saying that they were. Even people voting genuinely for Marcos knew that it's not fair election. So I really don't know where this is coming from.
Okay.
Can I just
Danny,
quickly
just
comment?
comment on that method, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just very quickly. To be fair to the PPCRB, they said that the elections were clean and fair insofar as their task was concerned. And what was their task? To review the election returns. So what did they do? They compared the printout to what is reflected in the transmission of the election results. So, of course, if there is no clear, transparent process in which the source code was generated, as well as how the SD cards or the storage device cards were configured, then of course, the printout and what is reflected in the transmission would be more or less 100%. And quite and you know, it doesn't come as a surprise that their findings would be something in the vicinity of about 99.9% accuracy. So that's one aspect that we need to remember. If the election system, the automated election system, has not been transparent in the first place, why would you have too much faith on 99.9% findings, where you just simply compared the printout with what was transmitted, when in fact the doubt with regard to the process has been there prior to the day of the election? So that's the aspect that we need to look at. And I don't want to preempt our discussion because while there is that parallel review of the election returns, there is also the random manual audit where there was a comparison between the uh, results of the ballot, the results of the particular vote counting machine. You look at the votes there, and then you compare that with the physical counting of the ballot. So there was a comparison between the results and the manual ballot. Now, there are around a little more than 750 vote counting machines that were selected for this process. But from the point of view of Contra Daya, given the various irregularities that happened on election day, there should be a combination of random manual audit and purposive sampling of the vote counting machines. What do I mean by this? For vote counting machines that broke down, this would have to be opened up and reviewed. The ballot should be counted manually, and then we have to compare that with the results, with what was transmitted. The same is true with certain clustered precincts that registered 0 votes for either Robredo or Marcos. And there are several hundred vote counting machines that registered 0 votes for certain presidential candidates. So what happened to these vote counting machines? We need to check if it's really true that Robredo or Marcos really had 0 votes in certain instances. That's one way to restore the faith in the automated election system, and not just simply a not so transparent manner of selecting or pre-selecting the vote counting machines that will be opened up. So for Contra Daya, we demand a better process to ensure better transparency for auditing the conduct of the elections. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Next one is, did IOM volunteers also experience harassment? If yes, how and from whom? So any comment from Mika? I can answer this a little bit, but what do you say, Mika?
Actually, we were kept on a very strict program, and we couldn't talk to anyone who would be seen as leftist group. So there were very strict security measures. But when I was there, I observed in another group that the group members were actually red tagged. They were discussing some political issues in a restaurant, which is of course a bit dangerous to do. But when they left the restaurant, there was a tarpaulin hanging on the wall with the face of one of the persons, and saying that he was an international communist terrorist and that he had to go home. So this was quite intimidating. So after that, the people had to wear caps and behave like other people, really put on other clothes and stuff. So there was that, but it was minimal because of the security restrictions by the AOM.
Yeah, thanks, Mika. I think there were 2 of the IOM participants had this experience in 2 quite separate times. And it was done by the NTF-LCAC, to answer your question. But the NTF-LCAC did not connect these 2 people to the IOM. So we feel that, basically the whole project was kept safe, but that, the one that was really after any foreigner who might be questioning the government, that's NTF-LCAC. So the next question, we'll go up to the hour. There's only a few more minutes to go, but it's good to have all these questions. There's a question from John Joshua Evangoza. Since it has been mentioned, what can be the recommendations on holding COMELEC accountable, since it's not adhering to its duties and not being the non-partisan body handling the electoral process? Anyone want to?
Yeah.
Lee,
I'm sorry.
I'll go to
Go ahead,
Lee.
Lee. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Look, thanks. Look, the question is essentially about holding COMELEC accountable, and it's incredibly important. I think it's compounded by the problem with the voting system. The electronic voting system is not transparent, and it's something that needs to be tackled. These vote counting machines are just incredibly unreliable. The vote counting algorithm must be independently verified as accurate prior to the election. That's what's set out in our recommendations. But I did also want to just add this whole issue. I really wanted to bring this up, so thanks for the question. I'm from Australia. We had in our federal parliament, we've had a major inquiry into electronic voting, and it was really instigated by people in the Conservative Party who really, really wanted to bring electronic voting in of whatever form. And there was a huge report done into it, and it was very interesting because I saw how desperate they were to bring it in. And I'll just read you one section of it, and said there can be no widespread introduction of electronic voting in the near term without massive costs and unacceptable security risks. And I emphasize that, unacceptable security risks. I think this is a problem in so many countries now. This electronic voting is being brought in really dubious circumstances. So what I just shared with you doesn't directly answer the question, but considering what COMELEC is about running elections. If they are running elections is about electronic voting and it can be so easily corrupted, we've got a big problem. And so I think addressing this and what form this voting takes is so critical. The voting counting machines alarm me enormously. So I think it's a question, and it would be good to come back to with a lot more detail. Thank you.
Thanks. Danny, any more comment on that, on COMELEC?
Yeah. Of course, the COMELEC should be investigated. The COMELEC should be investigated. So that's why part of the call of Contra Daya is to have an oversight committee, an independent commission that will really look at the handling or mishandling of the COMELEC with regard to certain aspects of election preparations. There are a lot of questionable things that would have to be looked at. One of them would be the lack of transparency in the printing of the ballots, the configuration of the SD cards, the source code review, the contract with F2 Logistics, which is owned by a major campaign contributor of the outgoing president. It is the one in charge of the delivery, storage, and warehousing of election paraphernalia. Why is it quiet on the actions of certain groups to use the COMELEC logo to forge the signatures of certain COMELEC officials on the fake resolution disqualifying certain party list groups and a senatorial candidate? There are a lot of things to look at, and it would be good for an independent investigation to happen. This is aside from our call for COMELEC itself to do its job in terms of exercising extra quasi-judicial and quasi-legislative functions in terms of handling the election. On a related note, let me just add that part of Contra Daya's call is to also push for the holding of the barangay and SK elections in December 2022. There are certain moves from the rich and powerful, from a certain segment of the rich and powerful, to postpone the barangay and the Sangguniang Kabataan or something like barangay youth elections. So we hope that this will also push through, because the local level, that particular local level elections have been postponed for the longest time now. And certain rich and powerful clans and big businesses would want the barangay officials, the village officials, to remain in power, either as political payback or as preparation for their election or re-election come the midterm elections 3 years from now. That would be in 2025. So we have to be more forward-looking in terms of our calls henceforth. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Danny. We've come to the hour, and I think I'll try to wrap up now. There's some more questions. I'll just quickly respond to them because they're simple, I think. Yes, we haven't sent the report to the governments yet, but immediately after this launch event, they will be sent to as many of the governments of the countries we come from, also to the European Union, to the UN bodies, and so we, including the ICC as well, so that we keep alive to all the levels of the institutions in the international community, what has happened in the Philippines, what's going to happen, what we expect to happen. You know, BBM complained about Smartmatic in 2016 because he was cheated against. And
yeah.
Now he's not been cheated against, he was cheated in favor of, so now he's not complaining. I mean, it's so transparent, really. And did the IOM witness the rampant distribution of sample ballots in voting? Yes, we did. There's so many comments in the text of the final report you'll find there. So I'd like to thank everybody who's participated. I know there's a few questions we haven't got to, but we just want to cut off now at the hour. I think we've done a very good job, and a lot of questions have been answered. I'd like to especially thank the media workers who've taken part, and I hope you're able to help us project a sensible account of what the International Observer Mission has found. I want to right now thank you very much to Lee, Mika, and Danny, our panelists, and to all of the participants in the actual IOM. There's over 60. They're really terrific people to have done that. And with the inauguration of President Marcos Jr. in 2 days' time, our work enters a new phase of intensified international solidarity with the Filipino people for all of their human rights. So thank you to the observers, to the Mission National Team who did all of the work managing the situation inside the Philippines, to the IOM Management Committee, which overall arranged the whole project from outside the country, to our writers team, to the layout team, to the tech team for today's webinar. Thank you all very much. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Keep safe. Thank you, everybody.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye now, everyone.